Tropical Depression 2 formed earlier today, and there are already signs of rapid intensification on the way. A lot of the ensembles have definitely exploded overnight, with the 0Z Euro really ramping up the power numbers. All the hurricane models have shifted away from Florida and towards Louisiana and Texas, and a lot more is starting to ramp up as the system is approaching the loop current and is continuing to move further and further to the west instead of further and further to the north, as more models are starting to shift this away from land and more towards water, giving this more time to organize, develop, and potentially strengthen. Many impacts across much of the Gulf Coast is expected, with the heaviest impacts expected for areas in Louisiana, Mississippi, and potentially as far west as Texas. And in this video, we're going to be talking about everything, going over the latest data that we have, and what may be happening in the next few days. Alright, let's dive right into this. So, this is Tropical Depression 2, and over the last 24 hours especially, things have escalated at a very fast and very alarming rate. At this time yesterday, this was, I believe, a low chance of tropical development, around 30 to 40% chance of development. Now, as you wake up and now as time has progressed, we now have a tropical depression, maybe a tropical storm on the horizon in the next few hours at the time of recording this video. Hurricane Hunter reconnaissance is expected to go into the system shortly to get a better idea as to what's going on. But over the last 24 hours, convection has fired on all cylinders. The models have definitely picked up on this, and we will talk about that in a little bit later. And the NHC has designated this a tropical depression, with tropical storm watches in effect for parts of the Florida Panhandle. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it and talk about the NHC advisory. So this is Tropical Depression 2. We'll get to the cone in just a second, but here is our first public advisory. Actually, they did update the public advisory at the time of recording this video. This is now the 1 p.m. advisory. Tropical Depression meandering off the west coast of Florida. 30 miles per hour, pressure of 1,011 millibars, moving north-northwest at 1 miles per hour. So this is almost stationary at this current point, according to the NHC. Taking a quick gander at things, minimum central pressure is 1,011 millibars. Storm surge for right now is 1 to 3 feet from Indian Pass to Chassahowitzka. If I mispronounced that, I do apologize for you guys. But we have tropical storm watches in effect for parts of the Florida Panhandle. Let's go ahead and pull up the cone for you guys right here. So this is the cone, Florida Panhandle to the Big Bend region over here. You have a tropical storm watch in effect. If you take a quick gander at your cone right now, it is expected to be moving through parts of the Gulf right here. It is expected to stay on the Gulf, off the Gulf Coast rather, stay in the Gulf and potentially make landfall in Louisiana before either staying just on land or moving just offshore and heading towards Texas as a tropical storm. The first discussion that we can pull up for right here had the intensity set at 60 miles per hour at the absolute peak when it's making landfall and moving inland. However, based on what we've seen with the guidance this morning, that in my opinion could be a little bit conservative. And based on what I've seen this morning with both the models and the conditions, I would not rule out a hurricane strength system with this rising tropical storm. And I'll explain to you why in just a second. So this is our ensembles from the European. We're just going to go ahead and jump right into this. The 0Z came out. Just to preface with this, we talked about this on the Triple P show last night. Every single model that we have seen has escalated and escalated and escalated with both the amount of ensembles and the amount of power associated with it. And this run right here is absolutely no exception. We're going to go ahead and show you what's going on with this, but as you start to see, it starts to really ramp up in intensity. In fact, what we're seeing in the next 48 hours, we're seeing a lot of very strong ensembles, potentially up down to hurricane strength with a lot of the power numbers going up. And what we're noticing too is the system that's moving north-northwest right now either is going to take a nice little loop-de-loop or stay stationary and then move due west instead of moving towards the Florida Panhandle like the original forecasts were talking about. So that's definitely a dramatic shift that we had seen over the last 24 hours, and the hurricane models have definitely reflected that as well. But as time continues to progress, you're definitely noticing those power numbers really starting to ramp up, with many hurricane scenarios starting to go off across much of this system right here. And the further south that this goes, the potentially stronger that this will get, as it'll be over the warm Gulf waters, over the ocean heat content provided, and it'll stay away from land. And given the steering currents that are in the position with this right here, a further southward shift is definitely possible. It's not. I'm not ruling out this maybe missing Louisiana, mainly because that high pressure system and the ridge that's building across parts of the central United States is only trending stronger and stronger. That's just going to drive this system further to the south, and we've seen this shift go on reflect more and more and more. So by the time we get to Wednesday morning, going into Wednesday night, either the system makes landfall in Louisiana or moves to the south and heads towards Texas. But look at these power numbers, especially with what we're seeing going on right here. 943, 931 millibars. This is obviously an outlier over here, but we are seeing numerous actually major hurricane scenarios with this, which is something we did not see yesterday. This has been uptrending more and more as more data and more models have started to pick up on the potential track and the potential threat of Tropical Depression 2. So that's definitely something that you're going to want to take very seriously. This is just the European ensembles right here. We're also going to show the AI runs as well as the GFS just to kind of balance it out and give you the full context. So here is the GFS for you guys right here. The GFS ensembles definitely have been a bit more on the conservative side. Funny how the GFS has stayed conservative throughout this entire system, where the European has been very aggressive. Let's go ahead and take a quick gander at this. GFS remaining pretty conservative. Not too much is going on. One ensemble has it at tropical storm strength. The rest keep it at tropical depression strength. But given the situation that we're seeing right now, I honestly think that that the GFS is kind of lagging behind by a pretty significant margin, based on the fact that we already have a tropical depression, and it is starting to strengthen slowly but surely as it's taking advantage of the conditions around it. But here is the AI run for the Euro. Let's go ahead and pull this up for you guys right here. This is what we got going on. You have a lot of ensembles really starting to ramp up. Right here, a lot of the stronger ensembles keep it further to the south off the Florida, not the Florida, but the Louisiana coast. Over here, potentially heading towards Texas as a strong tropical storm, potentially. European is definitely picking up on the power numbers. The AI run is like, hold on, we're not quite seeing this just yet. We're thinking it's going to be around moderate to strong tropical storm strength, but we'll keep you updated on that for sure. So that's what we have with the Euro AI. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Google DeepMind. And here is your Google DeepMind. Look at how concentrated and how condensed this whole signal is. And the power numbers with the Google DeepMind are really starting to ramp up. Potentially some hurricane strength power with the Google DeepMind going into Louisiana. The majority of the ensembles do have the system crashing into either Louisiana or Mississippi, but a lot of the stronger ensembles move it out to sea and potentially have it heading towards Texas, potentially anywhere from Houston to Matagorda Bay, all the way potentially down to Corpus Christi, according to a lot of these models, are going to need to watch out for this. But definitely a lot of pop, especially with the AI models that are starting to ramp up. The European and the AI models are definitely starting to see that aggressiveness really start ramping up. And it seems to me that the Google DeepMind and the European AI is starting to pick up and get closer and closer to what the classic European model is showing at this current point. So it's definitely a bit of a concern taking a quick gander at this. Let's go ahead and take a look at the GENC run for this. Let's go ahead and pull this up. You have the ensemble starting to pick up. You have the power numbers really starting to ramp up. But the majority of them, it looks like it's a 50-50 split almost, where you have a lot of the ensembles staying off the Louisiana coast and heading towards Texas. And that's where you're getting a lot of these power numbers, especially with those hurricane scenarios going right there. So these are all the ensembles we have pulled up for you. And another trend that we've noticed too is the operational runs, after so much lagging behind, have finally started to catch up to what the ensembles are saying. And here is your European just to start off with. This is the 0Z that was running earlier this morning. This is what we got for you guys for the 0Z. Look at this. It's finally starting to catch up to what the ensembles are showing. Not necessarily in terms of the track, I would say. Definitely the track has shifted further to the south based on what we've seen with the ensembles, but what we're seeing with the operational is kind of a blend with all the ensembles, mainly keeping it around tropical storm strength, mainly staying just off the Florida, Alabama, Mississippi coast before making landfall around the Louisiana Delta area as either a weak tropical storm or tropical depression. You look at the operational run and go, okay, this isn't showing that much, Patrick. Why are we talking about this? The reason we're talking about this is because we were talking last night about the kind of the distance between the ensembles and the operational run. It looks like the operational runs have started to catch up, and what you may see right here with what we're looking at maybe around moderate tropical storm strength may potentially accelerate as we get more data, and especially as the hurricane hunters start to go in, given the current observations and the current conditions that we are dealing with at this current point in time. So that's what we are starting to notice with the Euro. The GFS is still lagging behind, so we'll go ahead and pull up the Canadian run as well, just to show some context with that. And we have the 12Z pulled up right now, as a matter of fact. And man, oh man, we're get down to 1,002 millibars as the system potentially heads towards the Florida-Alabama border before making landfall over there. So the Canadians definitely more of a northern bias before all of a sudden getting yanked, mainly due to the high pressure system and the ridge setting up over here across parts of the Midwest into parts of Louisiana, maybe making landfall there, and then heading towards Texas as a tropical storm. So that's what we're seeing on the operational runs. Let's just show for context what we were seeing at the 12Z yesterday, just to kind of show you how quickly the operational is starting to catch up with the ensembles. So what you had before at 12Z yesterday was the system first heading to the north, remaining rather disorganized before moving towards Louisiana and kind of staying inland. What we see from the 12Z today is a much further to the south shift, a lot more organized, taking full advantage of that low wind shear and that moisture that we're dealing with over there too, off the coast of Florida, before making landfall in Louisiana and Texas as a tropical storm. So that's kind of the shift we have noticed from this right here. And this is just a couple of the ensembles and the operationals that we've shown you. I want to also emphasize the conditions too, because we've looked at the models. You're going, okay, the ensembles are still really screaming that this is going to be a powerful storm, while the operational runs are saying this is just going to be a tropical storm. What's the disconnect still, and what are the conditions saying? Well, let's go ahead and get started with our conditions. Let's pull up our water temperatures real quickly, ladies and gentlemen. Here is what we got. Water temperatures across much of the Gulf eclipsing 30 degrees Celsius, 31 degrees Celsius in a few isolated areas. That is 86 to 88 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who do not use the metric system. But ultimately, what you have going on is you have very piping hot water temperatures in the Gulf, primarily fueled by a bunch of heat waves and another heat wave that's currently developing right now in the United States. That's really going to fuel this, and based on the fact that this is already a tropical depression and this system is only going to continue to escalate and it's taking full advantage of those water temperatures, and a lot more convection is really starting to fire off, especially over the last 24 hours, that water temperature is only going to continue to fuel it on top of the ocean heat content that it's currently sitting over. Where it's currently at right now is an area of about 50 to 75 OHC, which is definitely taking full advantage of, and it's expected to stay over in that region for another, I'd say, a day or so before starting to shift further to the west, and potentially, if it stays far enough south, entering parts of the loop current where you're seeing the OHC values close to cracking 100 OHC in that potential path. And if it even moves even further to the south, then you're going to have a scenario where it runs right into a lot of the 125s plus OHC over there, potentially makes it an even worse scenario for those of you tuning in from Texas. But overall, ladies and gentlemen, you have the warm water and you have the OHC already starting to fuel this. Now you got to look at the wind shear, you got to look at the dry air aspect of this and go, okay, you're looking at this right here. What exactly are those going to do? And the questions I would say right here, we'll start with the wind shear and then we'll get to the dry air. The question I have to ask you guys based on observations I have seen is, what wind shear? I looked at the Sims data right here. We're going to go ahead and pull this up for you guys right here. Let's go ahead and see our wind shear values. The question I have to ask you is this. What wind shear is there at this current point? This little pocket of 20 knot wind shear over here in the central Gulf, that's not going to do too much. It's currently over an area of about 10 to 15 knots of wind shear. It was even less last night, around 5 knots. As a matter of fact, and some of this quote-unquote shear is actually the storm producing its own winds at this point too. So you're looking at maybe an even less scenario where you're looking at about 10 knots of wind shear. So that's more than enough wind shear to really generate and keep the system going and producing right here. The wind shear map that I'm pulling up right here, there's really no issue that I'm seeing at this current point in time with the wind shear. Also, taking a quick gander at your dry air aspect, the question I have to ask you guys is, at this current point, what dry air are we dealing with? Yes, there is some dry air further to the west, and there is a little bit of dry air that still needs to be mixed out in the system, but this is very mixable dry air, and we were looking at this a lot last night, and I was saying this is very mixable dry air, ladies and gentlemen, and the amount of convection that just kept carrying and carrying and carrying on, it just reinforced that to me completely. And you're seeing a lot of this deep convection really starting to mix out a lot of that dry air that remains in near the center of circulation. You do have some of this dry air business moving into parts of the northwestern circulation, but a lot of convection is starting to fire off over there that's kind of protecting the core from any dry air entrainment. So based on the current observations I am seeing right now, it's a very healthy system, and it's something that we are all going to need to watch out for because, in my opinion, based on what I'm seeing with the conditions, this is actually going to be a scenario I think catches a lot of people off guard. Am I going to sit here and say that we're looking at this major explosive system that's going to make cause a lot of havoc around much of the Gulf? Honestly, I'd say maybe. And I said this earlier today, but hurricane contention is absolutely there. And the reason for that is because this isn't moving towards Florida anymore, where there's going to be wind shear eventually. We're going to talk about that in a second. It's moving west out of that wind shear potential and into that calmer wind shear, as well as more deeper into the OHC and the water temperatures. And the dry air that's there is just getting mixed out more and more and more as time continues to progress. And as we see even more moisture coming in from the deep south, that's really just going to keep fueling the system as time continues to go on. Even looking at this map right here, looking at the satellite imagery with the water vapor, you can see that it's just getting more and more mixed out right here. And I just got some messages from Logan, as a matter of fact. Like, this convection is just getting deeper and deeper too. Let's look at DAPIA for you guys as well. We can give you a minute-to-minute analysis as what's been going on, because this is what we were looking at last night. Right here, we were saying if it keeps producing from last night, if it gets past Dmax and when the sun comes up and it's still going, you're going to want to watch out for this. Seizure warning to those prone to flashing lights. But as you look at it, you're seeing pretty much convection across this entire area, firing on all cylinders. You're seeing this once again. Take a quick gander at this. You're seeing more convection. So you're seeing several areas really starting to fire off, especially on near the surface, not the surface, but rather the middle, and especially on the southern side of it too, as that convection continues to just wrap around more and more and more as the hours continue to progress. So with that all being said, we've looked at the current observations, we looked at the current conditions. What are the forecasted conditions, and how are they going to pan out? For start, let's look at our wind shear values right here. The wind shear is definitely going to get interesting. It has a really long window of, I'd say, about 3 to 4 days of pretty significant tropical development before wind shear starts to ramp up a bit. But across much of the Gulf, what wind shear? What wind shear are we dealing with? Are we dealing with the wind shear from the storm itself? That's not going to do anything to it. You're looking at a very low wind shear profile throughout much of the region going into 36 hours out, and you do see this wind shear uptick in Florida, but as this system moves further to the west and this wind shear business over here starts to collapse in parts of Texas and Louisiana, you're not going to see too much wind shear starting to ramp up and potentially impact the system until this maybe moves towards Louisiana a little bit more at that current point. But if this heads towards Texas, there is no wind shear stopping this. Yes, there is wind shear to the east of it, but as long as it stays far enough away from it, you have a scenario where the wind shear, where the system is going to not really do too much to weaken it at all. and you're going to have still a very favorable environment. The farther south this system actually goes, the better the environment, and that is very scary looking at this from my perspective, because you're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, this seems a little unrealistic with all these big power scenarios that the ensembles are showing, but based on the science that I'm seeing, especially with the dry air mixing out pretty quickly too, it definitely has a lot of merit. And as long as it can stay over water, and as long as it can stay west of that wind shear that's moving towards the Gulf, it's going to have no problem intensifying at this current point. Even if it hits Louisiana, it's going to have no problem intensifying. If it hits Texas, it's absolutely going to have no problem intensifying. So that's kind of your main thing. This system has such a high ceiling to it. 60 miles per hour from the NHC is definitely a good start with this. I'm glad they're being conservative with this because of the observations and the fact that we don't have recon data just yet. But I would expect this in the next couple of days to really start ramping up in intensity. I would not be surprised that by the time we end the night tonight, the NHC is forecasting hurricane strength based on everything that I have seen and based on all the conditions and all the data I have looked at. Taking a quick gander at your dry air aspect of it, well, the question I have is what dry air is going to stop this if there's not going to be much wind shear, because you're going to have more moisture infuse and you're going to have more moisture carrying into the Gulf that allows for the system to really continue to reinforce and build itself up. You have a pretty deep moisture pocket, and if this system continues to shift further and further to the south, it's going to have that moisture to continue to advect, and it's also going to have a lot of mixable dry air to work with. So as long as it consolidates and as long as it continues to build off the core it's building right now, you're going to have a scenario where this system is just going to start taking off at a pretty alarming rate, starting, I'd say, tomorrow, if this system continues to get its act together the way it has been last night and so far today. So that's kind of my key takeaways right there. If you're tuning in from Alabama, tuning in from Florida, quite frankly, anywhere along the Gulf Coast, from Brownsville all the way to the Florida Panhandle, you're going to want to pay attention to this and take this very seriously, because there is a realistic chance that the system intensifies at a very fast rate, potentially gets up to that hurricane contention strength that I was talking about, and all hell could potentially break loose from all the data I have seen that has really just been screaming at me over the last little while. So we're going to go ahead and close that video out right here for you today. There will be another live stream with the Triple P show tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, going more in depth with this. Be sure to like and subscribe if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to help out, hang out, ask us questions, join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. Also, shout out to everybody that was on the stream last night. Thank you very much for the support. It meant a lot to me, and I'll continue to provide the coverage I can for you guys with this developing tropical cyclone. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.